Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're totally reframing a piece of modern history you probably thought you already had figured out. We're talking about the infamous 2001 dot-com crash. But here's the secret. It wasn't just a financial disaster. Actually, it was the fiery, essential crucible that literally built the digital world we live in right now. Just think about this quote for a second. $5 trillion in paper wealth. Just gone. Wiped out. It sounds like a total catastrophe, right? Well, history loves a good narrative twist. That massive, unprecedented financial loss secretly funded and, frankly, laid the absolute bedrock for today's artificial intelligence revolution. The speculators basically paid for the fire, but the true engineers? They used it to build the furnace. Section 1. The dot-com delusion. Okay, let's dive into this. By late 1999, Silicon Valley had completely detached itself from economic reality. The whole thing really kicked into high gear with the hyper-parabolic Netscape IPO back in 1995. That event basically opened up this uncontained river of speculative venture capital. Wall Street systematically took centuries-old underwriting metrics and just tossed them out the window. Liquid net profits, free cash flows, tangible assets? Nope. That was all discarded as the industrial ledger, boring markers of an archaic economy. Instead, we entered what we can call the eyeball matrix. Suddenly, the new metrics of corporate value were totally abstracted into things like user velocity, customer eyeballs, and page view clicks. You had these ambitious startups with nothing but a software hypothesis on a napkin and a .com domain, and boom, they were suddenly worth billions. The fanatical mandate of the era was simply get big fast. Startups intentionally burned tens of millions of dollars a month on lavish parties and crazy customer acquisition strategies, basically just assuming the network would eventually hand them a monopoly. Section 2. The March 2000 Reckoning. But you can really only defy economic gravity for so long. Eventually, the unsustainable math catches up with the fantasy. Think about the number 5,048.62. On March 10th, 2000, that was the closing point of the NASDAQ Composite Index. It was the absolute, precarious, top-heavy apex of what had essentially become a giant pyramid scheme. By this point, the valuations of infrastructure giants like Cisco, which, by the way, temporarily became the most valuable corporation on planet Earth, were mathematically dependent on a continuous influx of fresh venture capital seeding thousands of young, non-revenue-generating startups. It was just incredibly fragile. And then, the dominoes fell, and they fell with terrifying speed. First, the Federal Reserve hiked interest rates. That raised the cost of capital and made venture capitalists seriously second-guess their high-risk bets. Second, a massive wave of capital liquidation struck Tokyo, and that triggered a global margin call. It essentially forced international banks to immediately dump their American tech stocks just to cover their debts. And then, the final, fatal blow. On March 20th, Barron's published a landmark exposé titled Burning Up. It laid bare a terrifying mathematical truth. 25% of the Valley's top dot-coms would be completely out of cash within 90 days. The consumer web had absolutely zero permanent business model. And man, the panic was instantaneous, and it moved incredibly fast. Section 3. Extinction of the consumer web. The initial fallout was literally a corporate extinction event for that first wave of consumer-facing internet ventures. These startups were operating on a profound structural fallacy. They were spending $50 in marketing just to sell a $10 product. When the music finally stopped, the sheer scale of the destruction was hard to even wrap your head around. Over $5 trillion in global paper wealth was just wiped out. When the public markets completely shut down, these dot-coms aggressively canceled their marketing budgets. And that move completely destroyed the ad-based business models of early media portals like Yahoo and Excite, who saw their revenues just collapse overnight. The NASDAQ then entered this agonizing multi-year tailspin, plummeting by 78%. This drop absolutely decimated public markets. It drove hundreds of overhyped, cash-poor internet upstarts into instant operational bankruptcy. We're talking sprawling, high-end office parks being abandoned overnight, with all their expensive Herman Miller chairs and advanced server racks getting liquidated at bankruptcy auctions for absolute pennies. By late 2001, over 500 internet corporations had been completely wiped off the corporate registry. Famous, high-flying names that everyone knew, like Pets.com and Webvan, went from these multi-million-dollar IPOs to total bankruptcy in just a matter of months. The superficial web was systematically and brutally purged. Section 4. Survival of the bedrock. Now, what's really interesting here is that while the consumer web was being vaporized, the deep tech bedrock, companies like Cisco, Intel, and Oracle, survived the fire completely intact. Now, yes, they took massive, humiliating hits to their paper stock valuations, dropping 80% or more in some cases. But operationally, their core technical assets were completely uncompromised. So how did they actually survive? Well, it comes down to three self-reinforcing operational modes. First, the universal IP moat. They didn't own speculative web traffic. They owned the physical patents and the core intellectual property of the digital age: Intel's microprocessors, Cisco's routing algorithms. Second, the long-term cash cushion. Oracle, for instance, was sitting on over $4 billion in liquid cash. They were structurally impervious to bankruptcy and could easily fund their R&D straight through a multi-year winter. And third, systemic customer dependency. Think about it. A bank can easily stop buying banner ads, but they can never structurally uninstall their Oracle databases or shut down their Cisco routers without totally paralyzing their operations. The global economy was thoroughly, permanently hooked on the Valley's plumbing. Section 5. Recycle talent and dark fiber. This perfectly illustrates how the economic destruction of the crash accidentally functioned as the ultimate catalyst for our modern digital age by executing this massive realignment of physical capital. During the boom, telecoms like WorldCom raised billions to execute an unprecedented industrial overbuild. They laid down millions of miles of high-purity fiber optic cables. But when those companies went bankrupt, the cables didn't just vanish. They remained buried in the earth as dark fiber. So venture capitalists and emerging cloud platforms swooped in and bought this massive global network for a micro fraction of its original cost. This catastrophic overbuild completely collapsed global bandwidth routing costs. All of a sudden, moving massive oceans of digital data was virtually free. It gave us the high-speed highway system required for cloud computing and the planetary data centers that we literally rely on today. At the exact same time, there was a profound redistribution of human capital. During the bubble, the most brilliant computer science minds were lured away to build low-value consumer web features for quick IPO cash. But when the bubble burst, this elite brain trust was violently purged from the startup matrix. They didn't leave the valley, though. Nope. They were recycled straight back into deep tech labs. And this massive injection of elite talent funded the engineering runs that birthed Google's scalable algorithms, Apple's Unix-based OS X, and the early frameworks of the entire software-as-a-service industry. Section 6. The modern AI mirror. Let's move to the present day and see how this all builds together. Because the technological line connecting the survival of that 2001 bedrock to our contemporary landscape is direct, unbroken, and mathematically continuous. Today, we're in the Phase 7 boom of artificial intelligence, centered right in San Francisco's hyperdense Cerebral Valley. Let's track how this built across three monumental historical transformations. Following the crash in the 2000s, virtualization pioneered by companies like VMware allowed single Intel servers to split into dozens of virtual machines that directly enabled Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud. Then came hardware acceleration. NVIDIA, who was insulated by steady cash flows from the video game market, survived the 2001 crash and made a massive gamble in 2006 on CUDA parallel GPU computing. That exact matrix multiplication hardware is what eventually broke the AI winter. And that brings us right up to today, Phase 7 AI. Massive venture capital is swarming foundational labs like OpenAI, echoing the exact same intense speculative hype we saw back in 1999. When we compare the 1999 bubble to the 2026 AI hype cycle, you can see the aesthetics have definitely changed, but the underlying logic really hasn't. The speculative front-end software applications still rely on user attention and huge cash burn, making them incredibly vulnerable. But the elite infrastructure, they hold the proprietary patents. Then and now, the ultimate winners of the current AI wave are the absolute hardwired bedrock: NVIDIA's Blackwell GPUs, Oracle's cloud data centers, Cisco's 800G switches. The hardware layer functions as the mandatory toll booth of cognitive capitalism. They tax the global compute pipeline, regardless of whatever volatility is happening in the broader market. The software code being compiled tonight is traveling along the exact structural highway paved by the survivors of 2001. So as billions pour into AI software today, it leaves us with a really fascinating question. Who actually owns the future? Is it the visionaries dreaming up the front-end apps, or is it the uncompromising engineers pouring the digital concrete? If anything, the 2001 crash proved that high technology is fundamentally an unsentimental material science. The ultimate power belongs to those who capture the absolute laws of hardware scale and lock human intent into the permanent corporate architecture of our civilization. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this completely changes how you view the infrastructure humming right beneath your fingertips.